Hi, I'm Dr. DL Duval. I am one of the members of the surgical team that conducted a national survey looking at the incidence and OR team awareness of near-miss and retained surgical sharps. The main goal of this survey was to determine what the overall perceptions are for the different members of the teams in the operating room when it comes to retained surgical sharps, which is classified as a never event and is when a lost needle or sharp is not recovered prior to a patient leaving the operating room. We also were looking at near-miss sharps, which is when metal foreign body is discovered and recovered before the patient leaves the operating room. We had 411 total respondents. This included 45% of those were surgeons, 32% were nursing team, and 22% was our anesthesiology team. We were mainly looking at how the overall perceptions agreed and disagreed. All three teams agreed that 1 to 5 lost sharp events occur per year. That was in the 90s and the 80 percentiles for most of these teams. They also agreed on the overall incidence for the retained surgical sharps with a 4.4 per 1,000 surgeries. They were looking also at the effectiveness of x-rays. The different teams agreed that about 26 to 50% of the time, x-ray can be effective at recovering a metallic foreign body. And as far as how much time that can add to the surgery, overall, looking for a retained surgical sharp can add about 20 to 30 minutes. And if you start using x-ray in order to find the sharp, this can add an additional 30 to 40 minutes for a total additional operating time of 70 minutes. The really important parts of where they disagreed are the overall recall of how many times the sharps are not recovered, and the surgeon's perception of only 30% of the time that they were not recovered, as opposed to the nursing team and the anesthesiology team, where approximately 50% of the time the sharps were not recovered. Looking at how often x-ray is believed to be used, surgeons believe that it was used 100% of the time in the search for a retained surgical sharp, whereas nursing and anesthesia said that they thought it was only used approximately 33% of the time. The other really big discordance came when looking at how often miscounts happen. 20% of surgeons believe that a miscount never happens, versus anesthesiologists, which feel that it doesn't happen 5.3% of the time. The main takeaways from this survey is that the incidence of retained surgical sharps is much higher than has been previously been reported in the literature. Our paper shows that 1 in 3,800 surgeries have a retained surgical sharp, which is vastly different from the very wide range that you can see in the rest of the literature on retained surgical sharps, which say that it can be anywhere from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 18,000 surgeries. We think that there are some barriers to reporting retained surgical sharps and near-miss sharps. In particular, the ability to report it can be challenging. The process is not user-friendly or very straightforward, and many people on the team don't actually know how to initiate that process. The second concern is for negative repercussions for the provider or the surgical team. Fear of punitive action after reporting. Recall bias is another very big issue. We particularly looked at the surgical group, and we found that surgeons were 2.95 times more likely to report that there were 0 lost events in the last year. And they were 2.5 more times likely to report that all sharps were recovered before leaving the operating room. As far as the implications for the provider, there are personal implications. This can cause second victim syndrome, which is a psychologically damaging situation where you feel guilt over something that's happened, and reporting this and recalling it accurately can be more difficult because they will try to psychologically protect themselves. Legally, this is also a challenge because this is a never event. So there is, by that definition, no defense for having a retained surgical sharp. And this can lead to punitive damage on the provider. Financially, there's also a very big impact. This can be anywhere from $70,000 to $200,000 for the provider, but as far as a settlement, this can be anywhere from $2 to $5 million for the hospital. So the main takeaways for patient safety is that we need to have a team-based approach to reduce the barriers to reporting these events. We need to have more transparency and a standardized reporting system that can be easily accessed by the surgical team. We also need more technologies for identifying retained surgical sharps to allow them to be recovered before leaving the operating room. This is especially true for needles that are less than 17 millimeters in size because X-ray cannot reliably detect these.